Hey everybody, this is Gabe Hernandez with Comical Opinions. Doing something a little bit different today. I wanted to talk about a kind of a psychological aspect of the comics industry and what I believe to be a barrier to bringing new readers into the fold, so to speak, and so much as making them new readers or consistent readers or returning readers to their local comic book shop or whatever retailer they use of choice. And that's centering around a psychological aspect known as the choice paradox or the paradox of choice. The inspiration for this video was an ICV2 article that came out a couple days ago. On the 8th, a couple days ago, talking about the number of different sort of psychological barriers that cause new people coming into. This is primarily talking about gaming shops like RPG tabletop games. And some of the different things that are barriers to them wanting to get involved with things like Magic the Gathering tournaments or Pokemon tournaments or any kind of sort of hobbyist gaming type scenarios. And he covers a different number of different psychological aspects here, like the hot hand fallacy and recency bias and what have you. But the one I want to focus on here is what they call the choice paradox. It comes from a book that I'll get to in a little bit. In his example, what he's saying is, and I'll read this verbatim. Finally, for this batch, there is the choice paradox, which I've talked about before, but is always worth revisiting. And there's a link to the prior article that was actually from 2017, if I remember correctly, which is this one here. Yes, 2017. The choice paradox says that while people say they want lots of options from which to choose, having too many choices causes them to vacillate between them to the point where it proves easier to just walk away without deciding. I'm reminded of this paradox every time I look at our or another store's WizKids Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder miniature selection or the Games Workshop racks. The offerings may be fine for customers who know exactly what they want, but a recent entrant to the hobby will look at the selection and throw their hands up. That is when the store staff needs to step in and help them and decide. Now, again, here he's talking about WizKids, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, sort of younger age tabletop gaming. But by extension, this could be pulled forward into comics and what's available at the local comic book store. So let's cover exactly a little bit more in depth what the paradox of choice is. This is based upon a book written by Barry Schwartz, came out in 2004, made a lot of splash in the kind of the psychology and really sort of the marketing and business industry as well. And I'm gonna read from this a little bit of the first synopsis here, but then I'm gonna paraphrase because I've gone through this one before, not on this channel, but just in other medium. Paradox of Choice: Why More is Less is a 2004 book by American psychologist Barry Schwartz. In the book, Schwartz argues that eliminating customer choices can greatly reduce anxiety for shoppers. Let's hold on to that word, anxiety. And autonomy, and this is a quote from chapter 5, autonomy and freedom of choice are critical to our well-being, and choice is critical to freedom and autonomy. Nonetheless, though, modern Americans have more choice than any group of people ever has before, and thus, presumably more freedom and autonomy. We don't seem to be benefiting from it psychologically. And then once you get into the book and you dig into this is a Wikipedia article as well, and you dig into it a little bit, but it goes something like this. If I know what I want, let's say I'm a seasoned comic buyer, I know the titles, I know the publishers, I know the characters, I know the canon, and I'm a pro if you want to look at it that way. And I go into a comic book shop, I know what I'm looking for. I can speak about the artists to some degree and the writers, and I know which ones I think I'm going to like, which characters I'm going to like. Do I want the Justice League? Do I want X Factor? Do I want Green Lantern? Do I want something from one of the Dark Horse books, or do I want something from Image, and et cetera, et cetera? I mean, having been immersed in the industry for as long as I have, you kind of know what you like and what you don't like. You've been exposed to a lot of different things. And so when you go into a comic book shop, you kind of know at least what you think is going to appeal to you. There's always room for surprise, but at least you know certain artists I like or certain writers I don't like. And that helps kind of guide you through that purchasing process, especially when you hear an announcement. Let's say you really, really, really love anything by Donny Cates. He's doing a great job on the Venom run currently. So let's say I'm a big Venom fan. I like what Donny Cates is doing. I go into the comic book shop. I know I'm looking for Donny Cates Venom, and I know I'm looking for maybe books that tie into his current run. In other words, part of my established thought process of likes and dislikes that have been cultivated over time helps me make that decision. But that's me as somebody who's kind of been exposed to the industry for a very long time. But if you take somebody who's new, let's say you have a young kid who's 10 years old, has maybe seen a couple of the Marvel movies and really liked it, or maybe he's visiting some friends and he said, let's go to a comic book shop and buy some comic books. I say, oh, that's neat, that's great, that's cool. And he goes into a comic book shop and he is flooded with all the covers that are on the shelf, all the books that are in the long boxes that are in the back bins, everything that's in the counter, on the displays, in the glass cabinets, everything else. It's great from a stimulus point of view. It's just inundating you with visual eye candy, and you just have kind of all the options there laid out in front of you. But what happens is, and that's the point of the book from Barry Schwartz, is when you have so many options, or in this case, too many options, and I think that's the differentiator there, is really saying that it's too many options, and you have no internalized guide or just experience to kind of help you navigate what choices to make, which book is going to be better. If I'm a 10-year-old boy or girl and I've never had any exposure to comic books and I just know I want to get something, the first question you're obviously going to ask yourself is, what do I get? Which book do I want? Where do I start? And then if you go into a comic book store and maybe there's somebody just behind the counter, but they're helping another customer, or they're not paying attention, and you just have this just a screaming amount of color, visual stimuli just coming at you, and you have no understanding of which books are sort of more geared towards your age, or might skew a little bit older, or might be science fiction, sci-fi, might be horror, might be sort of kid detective adventure. You have none of that background or understanding. You have nothing to guide you. Everything essentially is the value benefit of making a decision is not there. It's not present. You have nothing to decide which comic book is better than another one, which one's going to appeal more to you than another one. But let's say the more likely scenario, if I pin that down a little bit further, let's help that out a little bit, is let's say I am that 10-year-old boy or girl, and I just came from watching Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, something, or some kind of Spider-Man movie, or saw a cartoon or something like that. And I was like, okay, I want a Spider-Man title. Then I go into that local comic book shop, and what do I see? I see Spider-Woman, I see Spider-Gwen, I see Amazing Spider-Man, I see Superior Spider-Man, I see all different kinds of variant titles of Spider-Man. And even though that's better, it's still not great, because I have no frame of reference to understand which title is the right one, where should I start? Are they in the middle of a story arc? That's where numbering comes into play. Which Amazing Spider-Man is better? Sometimes the variant covers get in the way of that a little bit, and it just becomes a confusing mess. And I say, well, okay, my friend isn't really into comic books, and the Empire crossover event this summer from Marvel was really great. You have Fantastic Four and the X-Men, and they're all kind of doing something. They're all mixing it up. Well, where do I start for Empire? Look, I bring up the Empire. This is from Bleeding Cool, and I bring up their checklist of all the titles that are involved in Empire, and I look at this list and like, oh, okay, so if I want to read Empire, do I have to get all of this? Do I have to start at the beginning? If I pick up X-Men number 10, and am I going to be completely lost? It's all these different choices that I make. And what happens is, when you get too many choices, the value benefit of saying, well, this one is definitely going to appeal to me more than the other, gets so diluted and so convoluted that it starts, what happens is your mind, that mental portion of your brain that is responsible for making decisions, gets overwhelmed. It gets stressed out. It gets agitated and aggravated. And what happens is the number of choices starts to become a turnoff. He said, well, Gabe, that's not fair. This is Empire, right? We're talking about Empire. I mean, that's a big crossover event. You probably shouldn't be starting there in the first place. If somebody's behind the counter, they should be able to tell you that. It's like, okay, fair, that's fine. What if I just, let me go back to that prior example. What if I wanted to get Spider-Man? Well, then here I'm at Previews World, which is from Diamond. And I say, okay, I just want to look at Spider-Man. Well, already, just by virtue this is just this week's releases alone, already I've got 3 titles to pick from. I've got number 48. I've got a variant cover number 48. I've got another variant cover 48. I see Spider-Man on the cover of Empire. I see Spider-Man on other covers here. Just scrolling down a little bit, I'm just moving around. But what if I wanted Ultraman? I see all these different Ultraman books with all the different covers. I see all kinds of stuff going on. Here's Web of Venom that's related. Here's another Web of Venom. Where do I start? Do I get a variant cover? Do I not get a variant cover? Do I know what to do? Do I not know what to do? So if I do it, let's do a search on Spider-Man. Spider-Man. No, that's not what I want. Well, you get the idea. Okay. Spider-Man. I have no frame of reference. Where do I start? And these are all upcoming titles. Look at all these titles coming up on November 11th. Amazing Spider-Man, all these different variant covers. Amazing Spider-Man number 52, 53. That's a big number. Do I have to start from the beginning? Here's some more trade paperbacks. Spider-Man Noir. What's the difference between him? What's the difference between regular Spider-Man and Spider-Man Noir? It's too much. What happens is, so when I want to bring a young person in, a boy or girl, say they're 9, 10, 11, whatever, and they say, I just want a Spider-Man book, they look at all these choices and they're saying, where do I start? Do I have to start at number 1 to understand what's going on? Do I start in the middle of the book? What do I do? And so that's kind of where this paradox comes in, is eventually at some point, especially for somebody who's much younger, who their their level of decision making is not as strong as it could be, it just becomes overwhelming and they just have nowhere to go. And so that's where the paradox of choice comes in, and why that's hurting comic book sales is because the way the industry, at least Marvel, DC, and the bigger publishers are bringing stuff out, and they bring out variants and all kinds of tie-ins and everything else, is if somebody wants to be a casual reader, they just want to come in off the street, young, old, no matter where you are, as far as reading comprehension, reading level, and everything else, you come into a comic book store, you just kind of don't know where to start. There are so many choices. There are so many opportunities. And what happens is if you don't have that background knowledge, every comic book essentially be from a value perspective of where do I want to spend my money, one essentially becomes no different than the other, unless you know what you're looking for. But the only way to know what you're looking for is to kind of be educated about the industry and the comics and the writers and the artists and everything else that's going on. So that's kind of where the complexity comes in, and that's where it's a hindrance to have so many choices. Now, of course, the obvious question is, okay, so what do we do about that? Rebooting in number 1s, that has its own value sometimes, but not always the case. I think what's been pointed out more recently is if we look at the manga model, and I know I kind of beat this drum a little bit too much, but I think it just kind of underscores the point very clearly, is if you go to the manga model, they are very structured in how they release their content. It's versus, Josei versus shonen versus seinen versus it's usually segregated by age ranges and usually genders, and then different genres, like some are romance versus others might be more horror based, and they're very structured about that. It's almost a kind of a card catalog type of setup of how they structure their comics. And you can say, well, and along with that is, they're not doing short, rapid-fire, 2-arc, 3-arc stories. Sometimes they are, but some of these manga stories, if I look at Bleach or Naruto or My Hero Academia, those stories are still ongoing. They've been going on in some cases for years. So that's the very definition of a decompressed story. But the way they structure it is usually they have more graphic novel-sized books. They're very clearly numbered. They're very clearly labeled for the type of category book they are, as far as shonen versus seinen and what have you. And it's very easy to pick up, saying, okay, I'm gonna start with volume 3, Dragon Ball, as an example. So I think from what I'm really getting at is what's happening is, because there's so little structure and so little guidance in how the North American, or I should say Western, comic book publishers are publishing their books, when new readers want to come in, there's just too much. It's an overload, and you just can't really decide. It's very difficult to decide, and that's turning people off. And so this might be an example where looking at how manga does it, as far as creating books that are very structured, very unique, and intuitively, by the way they are published, give you at least some minimum level of guidance. That will help inform new customers when they want to come in, saying, okay, I want to read something along this type of book, action adventure, say something suitable for an 11-year-old. You can automatically go to the shonen section and pick out something that at least works for you. It doesn't pinpoint exactly, but at least gives you some guidance. And then it helps reduce the stress, helps reduce the anxiety about trying to decide when all the choices essentially start to blend together and look the same. So I guess this is me kind of banging the drum a little bit about, look at how other comic industries are doing it, especially manga, because they are growing like gangbusters. And I think if the Western publishers like Marvel and DC took a modified approach to how they're packaging, numbering, and categorizing their comics, that's going to help newer readers that just walk in the door, the casual readers that are coming in off the street, give them an easier decision to make about what kind of comics they would like, and kind of experiment with purchases. And hopefully, if they do that enough, they're going to start developing new recurring customers. That's my opinion. Hopefully, that's not too far off base, but I'd like to hear your opinion as well. So if you thought this was interesting, please like, share, comment, subscribe down below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Comical Opinions newsletter. I put one out every week, which is essentially a long-form article talking about an assortment of one particular topic that kind of resonated throughout the course of the week. And if you go there, it's completely free. And for everyone who subscribes in the very near future, I'm going to have some perks and benefits that you might find very enjoyable, but you can only get them if you subscribe, and it is 100% free. So that is the opinion for today. This is Gabriel Hernandez with Comical Opinions. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Please like, share, comment, subscribe down below. Or if you think this is a terrible idea, give me that thumbs down and tell me in the comment section why you think this is a terrible idea. Again, thank you much for your time. I appreciate it, and have a great day.